Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories. Please like and subscribe, and hit that notification icon so you never miss out. Now on with the stories.
It's hard to believe that a simple garden could spark an all-out war in our quiet neighborhood. But that's exactly what happened. It all started when my wife, Emily, and I moved into our dream home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. We were excited about the well-manicured lawns, the friendly neighbors, and the promise of a peaceful life. We had spent years saving up for this house, and the thought of finally having a place to call our own was exhilarating. Karen was the president of our Homeowners Association, and she took her job way too seriously. From the moment we moved in, she seemed to have it out for us. At first, it was just little things, a warning about our trash cans being left out too long or a passive-aggressive note about the color of our curtains. We tried to brush it off, thinking she was just doing her job. But as time went on, Karen's behavior became more erratic and controlling. She'd patrol the neighborhood in her golf cart, clipboard in hand, looking for any minor infraction she could find. It was like living under a microscope, and the stress was starting to get to us. One day, Emily decided to start a small garden in our front yard. It was nothing fancy, just a few flowers and some vegetables. We thought it would be a nice way to add some color to the neighborhood and maybe even share some fresh produce with our neighbors. Emily had always had a green thumb, and she was excited to bring a bit of life to our front yard. She spent hours planning the layout, choosing the plants, and preparing the soil. It was a labor of love, and I could see how much joy it brought her. Karen, of course, had other ideas. She showed up at our door the very next day, her face flushed with indignation and her eyes blazing with self-righteous fury. In her hand, she clutched a well-worn copy of the HOA bylaws, waving it in our faces like a weapon. Her perfectly coiffed hair and immaculate outfit seemed at odds with her aggressive demeanor. "This garden of yours is a blatant violation of our community standards," she declared, her voice shrill and commanding. "It must be removed immediately, or you'll face severe consequences." We tried to reason with her, our voices calm despite the growing frustration. We pointed out that several other houses in the neighborhood had similar gardens, some even more elaborate than ours. The Johnsons down the street had a beautiful rose garden, and the Smiths around the corner grew vegetables in their front yard. "Those are different," Karen snapped, dismissing our arguments with a wave of her manicured hand. "They were approved by the previous board. I'm in charge now, and I say your garden has to go." We attempted to explain the benefits of our garden, how it added beauty to the neighborhood, attracted beneficial insects, and even helped with water conservation. But Karen wouldn't hear it. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned our yard, making notes on a clipboard she'd brought with her. "You have 48 hours to remove every last plant," she declared, her tone leaving no room for argument. "If it's not gone by then, you'll be facing daily fines until you comply." With that, she spun on her heel and marched off, leaving us standing in our doorway, stunned by the absurdity of the situation. We watched as she strode down the street, already eyeing other houses for potential infractions. It was clear that this was just the beginning of Karen's reign of terror in our once peaceful neighborhood. We decided to stand our ground. After all, it was our property, and we weren't hurting anyone. We even got some support from our neighbors, who thought Karen was being ridiculous. The Johnsons and the Smiths were not being harassed. It seemed unfair that we were being singled out. For a few weeks, things were tense but quiet. We'd see Karen drive by in her golf cart, glaring at our garden, but she didn't say anything. We started to think maybe she'd given up. Emily continued to tend to her garden, and it flourished under her care. The flowers bloomed in vibrant colors, and the vegetables grew plump and healthy. We even started sharing our harvest with our neighbors, who appreciated the fresh produce. Then, one night, everything changed. I was up late watching TV when I heard a noise outside. At first, I thought it might be a raccoon or something, but when I looked out the window, I saw a figure moving around in our front yard. The moonlight cast an eerie glow, and I could make out the silhouette of someone hunched over, digging furiously. I grabbed a flashlight and went outside to investigate, my heart pounding in my chest. The cool night air hit my face as I stepped onto the porch, and I could hear the distinct sound of digging coming from our front yard. As I approached, the beam of my flashlight caught glimpses of destruction. Petals fluttering in the air, leaves scattered across the grass. As I got closer, I realized it was Karen, and she was tearing up our garden with a shovel. Her movements were frantic and erratic, like a woman possessed. Flowers were strewn everywhere, their delicate petals crushed under her feet. Our carefully tended vegetables, which we had nurtured from seedlings, were scattered across the lawn. Tomatoes lay smashed, their red pulp glistening in the moonlight. The carrots we had planned to harvest that weekend were uprooted and tossed aside like weeds. "Karen!" I shouted, my voice cracking with a mix of shock and anger. "What the hell are you doing?" She whirled around, the shovel still clutched in her hands. Her eyes were wild, almost feral, reflecting the light of my flashlight. Her usually perfectly styled hair was disheveled, with leaves and dirt tangled in it. Her expensive blouse was smeared with soil, and her breath came in ragged gasps. "I told you this garden had to go," she snarled, baring her teeth like a cornered animal. "You didn't listen, so I'm taking care of it myself." Her voice was filled with a manic energy, a far cry from her usual prim and proper tone. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool night air, and I could see her hands shaking as she gripped the shovel tighter. The devastation around her feet was a clear reflection of her determination, or rather, her obsession. Our once beautiful garden, a labor of love that had brought joy to the entire neighborhood, now lay in ruins, victim to Karen's twisted sense of order and control. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This woman had completely lost her mind. I pulled out my phone and called the police, while Karen continued to destroy our garden. Emily came running out, her face pale with shock. She tried to stop Karen, but Karen shoved her aside, muttering something about community standards and property values. When the cops arrived, their patrol cars flashing lights illuminating the chaotic scene, Karen's demeanor shifted from manic to defensive. She straightened her disheveled appearance as best she could, brushing dirt from her clothes and attempting to smooth her hair. As the officers approached, looks of confusion evident on their faces, Karen reached into her pocket and pulled out her HOA president badge. She waved the small, plastic badge around frantically, as if it were some kind of magical talisman or get-out-of-jail-free card. The badge glinted in the moonlight, its official-looking seal a stark contrast to the destruction surrounding us. Karen's eyes darted between the officers, seeking any sign of recognition or deference to her perceived authority. "I have the authority to do this," she insisted, her voice taking on a shrill, desperate quality. She thrust the badge towards the closest officer's face, forcing him to take a step back. "It's in the bylaws." Karen's fingers trembled as she fumbled with a folded document she produced from her back pocket, a copy of the HOA regulations. She began flipping through the pages frantically, muttering under her breath as she searched for the non-existent clause that would justify her actions. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and her eyes had a wild, almost feverish gleam as she continued to plead her case. "See, right here," she exclaimed, jabbing her finger at a random page. "As HOA president, I have the right to maintain community standards. This garden was unauthorized. I'm just doing my job." The officers exchanged skeptical glances, clearly unimpressed by Karen's attempts to legitimize her destructive behavior. One of them gently but firmly pushed Karen's outstretched hand holding the badge away, while the other began to read her rights. The reality of her situation seemed to slowly dawn on Karen as the officers explained the charges she was facing: trespassing, vandalism, and destruction of property. The police didn't care about her assertions. They arrested Karen on the spot for trespassing, vandalism, and destruction of property. As they led her away in handcuffs, she was still ranting about community standards and property values. The scene was surreal, and I felt a mix of anger and relief. Finally, someone was holding Karen accountable for her actions. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. We filed a lawsuit against Karen and the HOA for the damage to our property and the emotional distress she'd caused us. Other neighbors came forward with their own stories of Karen's tyrannical behavior, and soon the whole community was in an uproar. The Johnsons recounted how Karen had fined them for having a bird feeder, claiming it attracted pests. The Smiths shared how she had demanded they repaint their house because she didn't like the color. Karen was forced to step down from her position as HOA president. The decision came after an emergency board meeting where the members, finally fed up with her tyrannical rule, voted unanimously for her removal. The board issued a formal apology to us and the other residents she'd harassed, acknowledging the undue stress and inconvenience caused by her actions. They promised to review and amend the HOA bylaws to prevent such abuses of power in the future. But that wasn't the end of Karen's troubles. The fallout from her actions continued to ripple through the community. Word of her behavior spread quickly, and soon she found herself ostracized by the very neighbors she once lorded over. Her social standing in the neighborhood plummeted, and she could no longer walk down the street without feeling the cold stares and hearing the whispered conversations behind her back. The legal ramifications were even more severe. Our lawsuit against her gained traction, and other residents began to file their own claims. The sheer volume of complaints painted a damning picture of Karen's tenure as HOA president. The court proceedings were grueling, with witness after witness testifying about the fines, harassment, and emotional distress she had caused. The judge showed no leniency, handing down hefty fines and ordering her to perform community service. The judge in our case didn't take kindly to Karen's abuse of power. She was hit with hefty fines and ordered to perform community service. The court also issued a restraining order against her, further restricted her movements, ensuring she could no longer come near our property. The legal proceedings were long and exhausting, but in the end, justice was served. The new HOA board, determined to make amends, took swift action to restore trust within the community. They held open forums to listen to residents' concerns and implemented more transparent processes for decision-making. The changes brought a renewed sense of unity and cooperation, transforming the neighborhood into a place where everyone felt valued and respected. But the real kicker came when the HOA board, under new leadership, decided to sue Karen for misuse of funds. It turned out she'd been using HOA money to fund her personal vendetta against residents she didn't like, including paying for private investigators to spy on people and buying surveillance equipment to monitor the neighborhood. The new board conducted a thorough audit, and the findings were shocking. Karen had embezzled thousands of dollars, using the funds for everything from personal vacations to extravagant parties. Karen's personal life also took a significant hit. Her husband, unable to bear the shame and legal troubles, filed for divorce. The once lavish lifestyle she enjoyed crumbled as she struggled to make ends meet. She had to sell her beloved golf cart and move out of her spacious home, downsizing to a modest apartment on the other side of town. The community she once ruled with an iron fist had turned its back on her, leaving her isolated and alone. She lost her job when her employer found out about her criminal record. And worst of all for her, she was forced to sell her house and move out of the neighborhood she'd once ruled with an iron fist. The once proud woman who had terrorized our community was now a pariah, shunned by everyone who knew her. Last I heard, Karen was living in a small apartment on the other side of town, working a minimum wage job to pay off her legal debts. She tried to join the HOA in her new complex, but as soon as they Googled her name, they rejected her application. Her reputation had followed her, and no one wanted to give her a position of authority again. As for us, we replanted our garden, bigger and better than ever. The new HOA board even gave us an award for the best-kept yard in the neighborhood. Every time I look at those flowers, I think about Karen and how her need for control ultimately destroyed her life. Emily's garden became a symbol of resilience and community spirit. Neighbors would stop by to admire the blooms and chat with us, and the sense of camaraderie was heartwarming. Our neighborhood is a much happier place now. People are friendly, kids play in the streets, and yes, there are gardens in quite a few front yards. We still have an HOA, but it's run by people who understand that a community is about more than just rules and regulations. The new board focuses on fostering a sense of belonging and cooperation, rather than enforcing arbitrary standards. I guess the moral of the story is that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Karen thought she was untouchable, that her position gave her the right to do whatever she wanted. In the end, her actions not only cost her everything but brought our community closer together. The experience taught us all a valuable lesson about the importance of standing up for what's right and not letting bullies have their way. Sometimes I wonder if Karen ever thinks about what she did, if she regrets the choices that led her to where she is now. But then I look at my thriving garden, at the happy faces of my neighbors, and I realize it doesn't really matter. We've moved on, and our little corner of the world is better for it. The scars of the past have healed, and we've built a stronger, more united community in the process. So if you ever find yourself dealing with a Karen of your own, remember our story and be prepared to fight tooth and nail. Don't hesitate to call the cops, file lawsuits, and use every legal means at your disposal to protect your rights. Rally your neighbors, document everything, and be relentless in your pursuit of justice. Because at the end of the day, no one has the right to terrorize you in your own home. HOA president or not. The full force of the law and a united community can bring down even the most tyrannical of Karens. Together, we can send a clear message that bullying and abuse of power will not be tolerated, creating a neighborhood where everyone can live in peace without fear of petty dictators.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.